Imagine waking up to discover your entire life savings, everything you'd worked for, gone. Not stolen by a stranger, but by your own brother and his smug wife. They even laughed, believing I'd never figure it out. What they didn't know, I already held the one thing that would not just expose them, but destroy everything they'd built. This is the story of how betrayal turned into the sweetest revenge of my life. If you've ever been betrayed by the people you thought you could trust most, hit that like button. Subscribe for more stories of justice served, and get ready, because this one will leave you cheering by the end. I'll never forget the weekend it all started. On paper, it was supposed to be a family reunion, one of those rare events where everyone sets aside their busy schedules and pretends, for a few days at least, that family still matters. My parents had rented a cabin near the lake, a place that was meant to bring us closer together. But for me, it became the stage for a betrayal I still feel in my bones. I arrived first, with a cooler of drinks and way too much nervous energy. I hadn't seen my brother Jason in over a year, and in that time, the distance between us had grown into something sharper than silence. Jason was always the golden child, the one who could do no wrong in my parents' eyes. I was the careful one, the saver, the one who planned instead of leapt. And somehow, that always translated to me being boring or too cautious. When Jason finally pulled up with his wife Melissa, I could tell from the smirk on her face that the weekend wasn't going to be easy. Melissa was the kind of woman who measured people not by their character but by what they wore, drove, or owned. And Jason had learned to echo her. He strutted into that cabin as if he owned it, sunglasses still on, tossing his keys onto the counter like some kind of movie star. Still driving that old car? Jason asked me with a grin that wasn't really a question. I smiled tightly. Yeah. It gets me where I need to go. Melissa rolled her eyes and let out a little laugh. Wow, you really are loyal. I don't know if that's sweet or just sad. That was the kind of energy they brought into every room. Every conversation turned into an opportunity for them to remind me of what I supposedly lacked. Jason bragged about his latest business ideas, most of which sounded like recycled schemes. Melissa bragged about the handbag she'd just bought, the spa she was planning to try, how exhausting it was to keep up appearances. I let it roll off me, or at least, I pretended to, because deep down, I couldn't help comparing myself to them. I'd spent years living modestly, saving every dollar I could, building what I thought would be my safety net. My dream was simple, to one day buy a small home, maybe even start a business of my own. It wasn't flashy, but it was mine. But that weekend, every laugh, every dig, every sideways glance seemed designed to remind me that in their eyes, I was less. They had the shine, the show, the loud presence. I only had patience, discipline, and a bank account I rarely even mentioned. What I didn't realize then was how much they already knew about that account. The reunion carried on like most family gatherings, laughter led with tension, smiles that didn't always reach the eyes. On the surface, we were sharing meals, playing board games, telling old stories. But beneath it, I felt something I couldn't quite name, like the ground wasn't as steady as it should have been. It started small. Jason asked me, casually, where I banked these days. You still with First United? He asked one evening while we were sitting on the porch, a beer sweating in his hand. I shrugged. Yeah, why? Just curious. Heard they've got some terrible interest rates, he said, grinning like he'd just discovered something hilarious. Melissa, lounging in her designer sunglasses though the sun had already set, chuckled like she was in on the joke. At the time, I brushed it off. Jason had always been nosy, always comparing. But as the days went on, I noticed the pattern. He'd slip in questions when no one else was paying attention. How often did I check my accounts? Did I use mobile banking? Did I ever worry about hackers? It felt odd, but I didn't connect the dots. After all, this was my brother. The one who used to share a bunk bed with me. The one who'd stolen my Halloween candy but also helped me learn how to ride a bike. Distrust wasn't the first instinct that came to me. The night after the reunion ended, I drove home, exhausted but glad it was over. I unpacked, threw laundry in the machine, and finally settled into bed. My phone buzzed on the nightstand just as I was drifting off. Notification, large withdrawal alert. I sat up, heart racing. My fingers shook as I opened my banking app. What I saw made my stomach drop straight through the floor. Balance, $0. Everything. Every cent I had saved over the last decade, gone. I rubbed my eyes, certain it had to be a glitch. But transaction after transaction scrolled across the screen, all within the past 24 hours. Transfers made online, approved by someone who knew the right security questions. Our childhood dog's name, our first street address, the make of my first car. Questions only someone who grew up beside me would know. My skin went cold. My head spun. It felt like the air had been punched out of me. I called the bank immediately, voice trembling, explaining what happened. The representative was calm, methodical, almost detached. Yes, the withdrawals had been authenticated. Yes, the account holder's questions had been answered correctly. No, there was no sign of external hacking. As the reality sank in, so did the truth. This wasn't a random thief. This wasn't some faceless hacker halfway across the world. This was family. And the more I thought about it, the more one face came to mind. Jason. His prying questions, his smug grin, Melissa's laughter when she parroted his little digs about my boring savings. I remember gripping my phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. My body shook, not from fear but from something darker, betrayal. That kind of betrayal that makes your blood feel like fire in your veins. I didn't want to believe it. I prayed I was wrong. But somewhere deep down, I knew. Jason and Melissa hadn't just mocked my discipline and dreams, they'd stolen them. And they thought I'd never find out. The morning after I discovered my account had been drained, I drove straight to Jason's house. I didn't call ahead. I didn't text. I just grabbed my keys, heart pounding so hard it felt like it might bruise my ribs, and drove. The entire ride, my mind spun in circles, anger, disbelief, a desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, I was wrong. Jason's house was everything you'd expect from someone who never earned an honest dollar. A shiny new SUV parked in the driveway, the latest model, still with dealer tags. Landscaping that probably cost more than 3 months of my rent. And when I knocked on the door, Melissa opened it, her nails freshly painted, her robe silk. She looked me up and down like I was a solicitor. "Oh," she said, smirking. "It's you." I didn't bother with small talk. "Where's Jason?" My voice was sharp, more brittle than I wanted it to be. Melissa tilted her head. "Jason. Your brother's here," she called in a sing-song tone, like I was some kind of neighborhood kid come to borrow a lawn mower. Jason sauntered into the living room, yawning, coffee mug in hand. "What's up?" he asked, casual as if nothing had happened. I took a step closer, my voice shaking. "You know exactly what's up. My savings account. 10 years of work. Gone." "You drained it." For half a second, his face flickered, surprise, maybe guilt, but then Melissa laughed. Loud. Sharp. Cruel. "You're kidding, right?" she said. "You actually noticed." Jason chuckled too, shaking his head like I was some fool who'd walked into the wrong room. "Come on, it's not like you were doing anything with it. Sitting in a bank, collecting dust? You should thank us. At least now that money's moving. Making things happen." I felt my hands curl into fists. "That wasn't your decision to make. That money was mine. My future." Melissa crossed her arms, her lip curling. "Oh please. Don't act like you're some financial genius. You hoard pennies like a squirrel. We just redistributed." "Redistributed?" I spat. "You stole. From your own family." Jason leaned in closer, lowering his voice but not his smugness. "What are you gonna do, huh? Call the cops? Tell mom and dad? You think anyone's gonna back you up when it's just your word against mine? You're the cautious one, remember? The boring one. No one even knew you had that much saved. It'll just look like you blew it on something stupid and now you're embarrassed." Melissa snickered. "He's right. Honestly, you should be grateful. We'll make better use of it than you ever could." Something in me cracked then. The humiliation, the rage, the heartbreak. It all boiled over into a cold, steady fury. They didn't just steal from me. They laughed while doing it. They looked me in the eye and dared me to fight back, certain I couldn't. What they didn't know was that I'd already decided. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The days after that confrontation were some of the darkest I've ever lived through. I went home with my stomach twisted in knots, my chest hollow. I'd spent years building that savings, skipping vacations, working overtime shifts, living modestly while everyone else splurged. And in one weekend, it was gone. Not just stolen, but mocked. I barely slept. I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying Jason and Melissa's laughter over and over until it burned into me. Some mornings I couldn't even force myself out of bed. What was the point? Every dollar, every plan for the future, had evaporated because I trusted the wrong people, because I trusted family. There were moments I considered giving up, accepting their cruelty as my reality. Maybe Jason was right. Maybe no one would believe me. But there was another voice inside me, quieter, but sharper. No. Not like this. Not without a fight. One evening, while I was half-heartedly sorting through some papers from the reunion, receipts, little notes I'd stuffed into my bag, I noticed something odd. A small, black flash drive wedged into the side pocket of my folder. I didn't remember putting it there. At first, I thought it might be mine. But when I plugged it into my laptop, curiosity prickling through the fog of my despair, what I saw nearly stopped my heart. Folders. Dozens of them. Spreadsheets. Scans of contracts. Emails. All tied to Jason's business ventures. But these weren't polished, above-board deals. They were messy, sloppy, and incriminating. Fake invoices. Shady investor agreements. Numbers that didn't add up. Even a chain of emails where Jason bragged about skimming money from partners who would never notice. I sat there frozen, my pulse racing as I clicked deeper and deeper. It wasn't just shady. It was criminal. Tax evasion. Fraud. Theft. And Jason, in his arrogance, had left the receipts, literally. That night, for the first time since my savings vanished, I felt something other than despair. I felt clarity. Jason and Melissa thought they'd stripped me of everything. But without realizing it, they'd handed me the sharpest weapon I could ever wield. I closed the laptop, my hands trembling, but this time not from weakness. From resolve. I whispered to myself in the dark. They think I'm helpless. They think I'm nothing. But this is how I end them. It was the first time in weeks that I slept through the night. Because now, the game had changed. Once the initial shock of what I'd found wore off, something inside me hardened. Jason and Melissa thought they had won. They believed their mockery would break me, that I'd crawl away humiliated and defeated. But now? Now I held their entire empire of lies in the palm of my hand. The first step was control. I didn't tell a soul what I'd discovered. Not friends, not family, not even the bank rep I'd been emailing with. Jason had always underestimated me, treated me like the cautious, boring sibling. I decided to let him keep thinking that. Let him believe I was licking my wounds, powerless, while in reality I was building a case brick by brick. I spent hours combing through that flash drive. I cross-referenced emails with contracts, matched spreadsheets against tax filings I could access online. The deeper I dug, the more obvious it became. Jason wasn't just dabbling in shady deals. He was neck-deep in fraud. He'd set up shell companies to funnel investor money. He'd falsified invoices to inflate expenses. There were even emails bragging about hiding assets from the IRS. At first, I was overwhelmed. The scale of it was bigger than I imagined. But then a thought struck me. If I handed this to the right people, Jason wouldn't just face embarrassment. He'd face prison. I began researching. Late nights turned into early mornings as I read everything I could about financial fraud, whistleblower protections, restitution. I bookmarked the IRS whistleblower program. I found contact info for a couple of the investors mentioned in Jason's emails. Each discovery made my pulse quicken with both fear and excitement. Still, I couldn't move too fast. Jason and Melissa were flaunting their new wealth everywhere. Instagram posts of them popping champagne in a luxury hotel suite, selfies in front of their brand new car. Each photo was like fuel to my fire, but I forced myself to wait. The louder they bragged, the sweeter the silence I gave them in return. To my parents, I played the part of the wounded but quiet sibling. When Mom asked if I was doing okay, I just smiled and said, "Yeah, getting by." I let Jason strut at family dinners, bragging about business deals paying off. He'd glance at me sometimes with that smug little smirk, like he was daring me to speak. I never did. I wanted him comfortable, arrogant, blind. Meanwhile, I was carefully building my arsenal, a binder of documents, printouts of incriminating emails, screenshots of bank records, a timeline of transactions. Every detail mattered. If Jason thought I wouldn't fight back, I was going to show him just how wrong he was. By the end of that month, I wasn't the broken, betrayed sibling anymore. I was a hunter waiting in the shadows, watching my prey dance in the open. And I knew the moment was coming. the moment I'd strike, and everything Jason thought he'd stolen would crumble in his hands. The thing about revenge is that it requires patience. And patience? That had always been my strength. Jason used to mock me for it, said I was too slow, too careful, too boring. But this time, those very qualities were the rope he'd hung himself with. By the time 2 months had passed, my case was airtight. I had every shady email, every fraudulent contract, every shell company connected to his name. I'd even pulled social media posts into the file. Photos of Melissa showing off handbags that cost more than most people's rent, Jason grinning beside a new sports car, both of them hashtagging #blessed and #winning while their victories had been bought with stolen money. The final push came one Friday morning when I sat at my kitchen table with a strong cup of coffee and hit send. The email went out to 3 places: the IRS whistleblower office, a federal financial crimes investigator whose contact I'd found, and 2 of the investors listed in Jason's correspondence, investors who, based on the tone of his emails, had no idea they were being bled dry. For a week, silence. Jason and Melissa lived loudly on social media, posting from a beachfront villa, mocking haters who didn't understand their grind. I almost doubted myself. Almost. But then the storm rolled in. It started small. Jason stopped posting. Melissa's Instagram went quiet. Then came the phone call from my mom. "Did you hear?" she whispered, her voice shaking. "Jason's house, there are police cars outside. They said it's some kind of investigation." I didn't let my voice betray the surge of satisfaction rising inside me. "Wow," I said simply, as if hearing about the weather. Later that day, I drove past their street. And there it was, a sight I'll never forget. Federal agents swarming Jason's mansion, cardboard boxes of documents being carried out. His shiny new SUV being hooked to a tow truck. Melissa standing in the driveway, her perfect hair a mess, screaming at someone on the phone. Jason, handcuffed, red-faced, being led down the steps while neighbors gawked. My heart hammered in my chest as I watched from the corner. It wasn't joy exactly. It wasn't even triumph. It was relief. A weight that had been crushing me for weeks, for years really, was finally lifted. They weren't untouchable. They weren't above the rules. I slipped away before anyone noticed me. Jason and Melissa didn't need to know I was the one who lit the fuse. At least, not yet. Because their downfall wasn't just about losing money or facing charges. It was about that look I saw in their eyes when the reality hit, the shock, the fear, the dawning realization that their arrogance had finally caught up with them. And I wasn't done watching them fall. The thing about revenge is that it requires patience. And patience? That had always been my strength. Jason used to mock me for it, said I was too slow, too careful, too boring. But this time, those very qualities were the rope he'd hung himself with. By the time 2 months had passed, my case was airtight. I had every shady email, every fraudulent contract, every shell company connected to his name. I'd even pulled social media posts into the file. Photos of Melissa showing off handbags that cost more than most people's rent, Jason grinning beside a new sports car, both of them hashtagging #blessed and #winning while their victories had been bought with stolen money. The final push came one Friday morning when I sat at my kitchen table with a strong cup of coffee and hit send. The email went out to 3 places: the IRS whistleblower office, a federal financial crimes investigator whose contact I'd found, and 2 of the investors listed in Jason's correspondence, investors who, based on the tone of his emails, had no idea they were being bled dry. For a week, silence. Jason and Melissa lived loudly on social media, posting from a beachfront villa, mocking haters who didn't understand their grind. I almost doubted myself. Almost. But then the storm rolled in. It started small. Jason stopped posting. Melissa's Instagram went quiet. Then came the phone call from my mom. "Did you hear?" she whispered, her voice shaking. "Jason's house, there are police cars outside. They said it's some kind of investigation." I didn't let my voice betray the surge of satisfaction rising inside me. "Wow," I said simply, as if hearing about the weather. Later that day, I drove past their street. And there it was, a sight I'll never forget. Federal agents swarming Jason's mansion, cardboard boxes of documents being carried out. His shiny new SUV being hooked to a tow truck. Melissa standing in the driveway, her perfect hair a mess, screaming at someone on the phone. Jason, handcuffed, red-faced, being led down the steps while neighbors gawked. My heart hammered in my chest as I watched from the corner. It wasn't joy exactly. It wasn't even triumph. It was relief. A weight that had been crushing me for weeks, for years really, was finally lifted. They weren't untouchable. They weren't above the rules. I slipped away before anyone noticed me. Jason and Melissa didn't need to know I was the one who lit the fuse. At least, not yet. Because their downfall wasn't just about losing money or facing charges. It was about that look I saw in their eyes when the reality hit, the shock, the fear, the dawning realization that their arrogance had finally caught up with them. And I wasn't done watching them fall. The raid was just the beginning. Over the next few months, Jason and Melissa's world unraveled piece by piece, and I watched it all unfold like a movie I'd been waiting my whole life to see. The flashy cars? Gone. The mansion? Seized. Their bank accounts frozen, their social media wiped clean. Suddenly, the people who once mocked me for living small were scrambling just to keep the lights on. But the real moment came in court. I sat quietly in the back row, almost invisible, as Jason shuffled in wearing an orange jumpsuit instead of his usual tailored suits. Melissa was there too, pale and hollow-eyed, clutching a lawyer's arm like a lifeline. The prosecution laid out everything: the fraud, the tax evasion, the investor theft. They even presented the stolen savings from my account as part of the evidence of Jason's pattern of behavior. I'll never forget the look on his face when the judge read out the charges, disbelief turning to anger, then to something that looked like fear. When it came time for restitution, the judge was clear: every stolen cent had to be repaid. Including mine. Watching Jason's jaw tighten, seeing Melissa bury her face in her hands, it was like years of humiliation melting off my shoulders. And here's the sweetest part: the investors Jason swindled? They now knew exactly who'd helped expose him. Several even shook my hand after the hearing, thanking me for coming forward. For the first time, I wasn't the boring one, the cautious one. I was the one who'd brought justice down on their heads. Jason glared at me once as he was being led away. His eyes burned with rage, like he finally understood what I'd done. But it didn't matter anymore. He couldn't touch me. Not now. Walking out of that courthouse, the air felt different. Lighter. My savings were being restored. Jason was facing years behind bars. And Melissa, well, she'd gone from flaunting handbags to begging for mercy. They thought they stole my future. But in the end, I took theirs. And I can't lie, it was the most satisfying moment of my life. Betrayal from strangers hurts, but betrayal from family? That's a wound that cuts to the bone. Jason and Melissa thought I was weak, thought I'd stay silent while they laughed at my pain. But life has a way of evening the scales. Sometimes, karma just needs a little push. And in the end, justice didn't just catch up with them, it ran them over. If this story gave you chills, smash that like button. And tell me in the comments, what's the most satisfying revenge you've ever witnessed? Don't forget to subscribe for more stories of betrayal, justice, and sweet, sweet payback. Because as this story proves, nothing tastes better than revenge served ice cold.